So I'll use that one instead. There is a Slido. I'll share it on the screen. Hopefully that shared it rather than what it did to my screen. So we've got 5 questions here. I've literally never used Slido before. I assume that QR code brings you here and allows you to add extra questions if you want. We can also shout questions out. Well, you don't have to own it, but Jim, I'm guessing this is you as it's got the name Jim next to it. How better to prepare the team for sprint planning? Let's start there. Okay. Do you want to expand on that question, Jim? Because it depends is probably the answer to all the questions. But
I suppose it's generic enough. I mean, like, what would be the, good practice, best practice, where we're going to put it, in getting teams ready so when they do go into a sprint planning, it doesn't turn into a circus, Yeah,
I know exactly what you mean. I think this is really, it comes down to getting really clear on what sprint planning is for. Most people will turn up and they just think, oh, we take some work and we get on with it. And yeah, that's part of it. But really we want people to understand what's it about, why are we doing this stuff when they're coming into sprint planning. And the key to that is backlog refinement. So invariably, how to get good at sprint planning is linked with how good are you at backlog refinement. What we're really looking for is a nice, smooth, flowing planning session where there's, in the main, there's always going to be surprises. We're never going to get away from that. But in the main, you've got people turning around and thinking, yeah, I already know about this. We've thought about it. We've talked about it a few times. So we've got some ideas as a team of how we're going to tackle it. We're comfortable. We're not nailed down precisely the plan. That's the point of planning. But we've seen it before. So really, it goes back to product backlog refinement. And that is where I think teams are preparing, or that is where teams are preparing for sprint planning. Are they doing that well? Are they taking enough time? The Scrum Guide used to give you 10%. It's now removed that and it just says you should be doing this activity. But 10% is a reasonable rule of thumb. But are they taking each item, product owner, customer, whoever you've got, bringing that item to the team and saying, this is what I want and this is why I want it. What questions do you have? And really digging into understanding the problem. Not thinking about the solutions, though, let's all be honest, we do that. But what's the actual problem we're trying to solve? How do we solve this? And through that conversation over time, because we've all been in refinement where stuff comes up and you think, that's a really good question and we can't move forwards without that answer. So let's park this and we'll come back to it next week. The item's broken down, but really it's understood more. And once you get there, actually for me, planning that individual item is so much easier because as a team, you kind of sit there and go, yeah, we know what this is about. The developers have been doing some thinking in the background. You've got a good idea of what those acceptance criteria look like. And that's going to give you a steer about what's inbounds and out of bounds. So that planning that item, and if you replicate that across the dozen or whatever number of items you take in, actually this is nice and smooth. So for me, and my advice invariably to teams is, if you're struggling planning, do more backlog refinement. Estimating is useful as a thing to create the conversation. Use it as an attractor for questions more than anything else. So that is probably my advice. How to prepare is be willing to take time out. Many developers sort of don't see refinement as part of their job. They're like, we're here to, in the software world, we're just here to code. Whereas actually understanding the problem is often a big part of it. Getting really clear on what the problem is so that when you go into planning, that becomes smoother. What do other people think? I'm going to throw it back to you because I'm still a lazy trainer.
I've never done one, so I can't answer that. No, it's probably the same for me as well. That's why I'm here.
That's fair.
All the tips.
Yeah, I've done loads, and I would completely agree with what John said. If the work is done, the refinement, the planning should go smooth. If I see teams struggling and trying to get stuff into sprints and stuff, it's not the sprint plan I look at, it's the refinement I go out and look at them and figuring out from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, occasionally stuff goes wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The night before priorities change and you walk in and you're like, we're going to work on nothing we've seen before. Okay, it's going to be painful. But refinement really came about from, people like myself who were in the Scrum world earlier on, not doing it and getting to sprint planning and going, oh, well, I don't know what that's about. We don't even know. That's not actually possible. And you just played a game of we can't do that until you found something so trivial that you could have done it as soon as it was mentioned. And it was that recognition that there has to be some planning done up front. There has to be a little bit of thinking. And yeah, so
you having to meet with the customers to do that backlog refinement before that sprint planning session?
Absolutely. You have to be... ideally, the person with the problem is who you're talking to, because what you want to be doing, your developers want to be asking questions, but what is it about that? What are you doing with that information? Getting that context is really important, because they can fix what you tell them is the problem. That doesn't necessarily solve the problem for you. The expert in that scenario is your developer, the person who knows how to solve the problem. So you'll often hear, well, what about analysts in this world? This is actually where the analysis skills come out, is how do we get that customer to explain the problem to us in a way that we can, usefully talk about it and communicate and ultimately understand.
Makes sense.
Good. Okay, before I come to Jim's next one, because that's the next on Slido, does anybody have a question out there, so to speak?
Just one other from me. Would you ever invite the customer to the sprint planning session?
Would you invite a customer to sprint planning? Yes, absolutely. Okay. It's not in the Scrum Guide, so the Scrum Guide doesn't talk to it at all. But for those of you who have been on my courses, you probably already know I don't really care about that. Really, this comes down to you want the best source of knowledge to be put with the people who can solve the problem. Okay, if you're a product owner and you're acting on somebody's behalf and they can't turn up, okay, that's the constraints that we're working with. But if they can turn up, wouldn't it be better if you could turn around and ask the person who's got the problem what's happening, why it's happening, rather than somebody who's sat in between? So within reason, if you've got 12 items coming in with 12 different customers, you might be pushing it. But yeah, if there's one or two customers and they want to be there and they want to help and they want to be involved, to throw the theory back into it, it's right there in the values, customer collaboration. We want to work with them. And so emphatically, yes, get them in the room, virtual or physical, get them talking. Because as part of that conversation, not only are the developers going to understand the problem better, be able to ask questions, the source of truth, the questions that they need to have answers to, but the customer is going to get an appreciation of what it actually takes to do this job. Very often, product development is a black box. I ask for stuff, and even in the Agile world, if we're using Scrum and it's a 2-week sprint, 2 weeks later they see stuff, but in between it's still a black box. They don't know it. But actually hearing that conversation, we're fortunate. Our customers are pretty smart people as well. They're not going to understand, but they're going to have a good appreciation for actually this is a lot harder than I thought. I always remember as a developer, we had a customer, a lovely lady called Laura, who thought it would all be easy. Because she would say things like, but I just want a button. It's like, yeah, you just want a button, got it. It's going to take about 2 weeks to get that button on that page because of the frameworks that we have to use for this product and connect it all the way through and test it and make sure it doesn't break anything else and all this. That button is 2 weeks. And when we just told her it's 2 weeks, she just dismissed us as lazy. When we actually incorporated her into planning and backlog refinement, and actually we brought her in ultimately as our product owner, it was, the curtains were drawn and she was just there going, there's just a huge amount of work that nobody knows about in what development is. And it's like, there is. But it's boring and it's not worth talking about. Getting the customer in, they get to have some insight to that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Just to slightly expand on that question, in the company I work with, we kind of have the customer as in the person that holds the purse strings, but it's a very different person to the actual end user. Where would you go on that front as to who should be in the room?
Now the politics, this is where it gets interesting. I would want the end user. So the clarification there is a customer is ultimately the person paying, the user is the person using the product.
Yeah.
In a good organisation that's looking to do the best by their users, they would give you access to the end user. The question becomes, if you've only got access to the customer, the person buying the product, buying the service, do they have sufficient knowledge and understanding of the problem that's being solved to add any more value than the product owner? And very often the answer is no. And it's, thank you for offering, but actually if our product owner talks to the user, they can get all the information that you can give us as well.
Yeah.
How you handle that, politely and respectfully. But yeah, good question. Get the end user if you can. The customers, my experience is sometimes they're incredibly knowledgeable and they really do know their stuff. But more often than not, they're a senior manager who's 2 or so steps removed from the work.
Yeah. And sometimes I find that they presume they know what the end user wants, and it's usually not the case. And it's something you battle with every day, because they'll buy something on the basis of what they think they know, but the user then won't use it because of that.
And we're all the way back where we started. The thing we're moving away from is, we think we know better. Precisely. It's, they're good people. They want to do a good job. They're bright. They know their stuff. We're not fixing their problem. And as long as we're not fixing their problem, they might give us some insight, but it's going to be more limited than the person with the real problem.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, another one from Jim. What does a good sprint planning session look like? So it's not quick. I'm going to start with that because actually one of the things I see too often is they are quick and people think that's good. My experience is it's not. What you want something that's relatively low friction. Okay? By that I mean people, they know what's coming. They've thought about it. They've worked with it. Okay, so there's no surprises. There's a sense of flow through this. What we have then is a product owner turning up with their lovely backlog, ordered for delivery. They've got some ideas about goals. Let's be honest, they're already looking at it and thinking, as are the developers. And we're starting that conversation. What's important and why is it important? Okay, so early on, there's likely to be some level of agreement about what the goal is for this sprint. What's going to be important? What does success look like for us as a team? And together they're going to choose the items that support that and be looking at the capacity to say, can we take more stuff in? Is this a sensible collection of work? So they're really looking item by item because they have good knowledge, because they did good backlog refinement. This stuff kind of makes sense, but open to that ongoing negotiation and discovery. We're still learning. Actually, in that, it may be that something further down the list, you kind of think, oh, actually, it'd be really good if we did that with all this work because it'd be easier to do it now, and whatever the reason is, so that as a team, they're really deciding what to do. And then, I'll be honest, the real work starts. Okay, because backlog refinement got us to this point. Done well, we're here, we know what we're doing. Yeah, of course there's some negotiation, there's some conversation still going on. But what we want now, and this is why it's not quick, is to start planning the work in truth. Right? So a sprint backlog is a list of items, a goal, and a plan to deliver those items. So what we're doing is product owner is going to go into the background if they're not actively a developer as well, and start working. So the developers are going to start working each item. How are we going to do this? What does a design look like? Right? When I was a developer, so in code we were using UML diagrams, and we were very often drawing things up very quickly and saying this system needs to talk to this system and this system. And we draw quite complicated diagrams. But what we realized was actually every time we drew an arrow, we had a task. So we could very quickly say it looks something like this. Bang, 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 bang. That's all the tasks to finish this item. Move on to the next one. Rinse and repeat. And that would identify new services in the software, new components, or how to connect existing things together. And it was those conversations that were invaluable. One of us would very often already have I think it looks like this, and we'd throw it up on the wall. But it was actually when we started talking about it, we'd realise, I'd look from my perspective and yeah, it was good, but somebody else was coming from a different position. They were like, yeah, but we could also do this. And that conversation became really powerful. And that's what, for me, good planning looks like, is options are brought up and discussed. Because we already know no one person has all the answers. And in fact, there are many ways of solving the problems we do bring to the table. Bringing those together requires a conversation. And that means that not only do we have options, but we have to have that safety. We have to have that equal voice that you'll often hear about. Your team members need to think, I can offer an opinion. I can say something that might be a bit dumb. Okay, it might just be a bit naive, but naive's good, right? In planning, you want the person who challenges and says, yeah, but that sounds really complicated. Why don't we just do this really easy thing? Because all the experienced people may look at them and just go, you know what? You're absolutely right. That's far easier. We should just do that. It will solve the problem. So everybody in the team needs to know in their bones that they can offer their opinions, they can offer their insights. And really, this is the bit of the Scrum Master's job that is hard, is getting people to that point. Not by, yeah, of course you're safe. Yeah, we can say that. That takes seconds. But they've got to know it. And they only know that over time by experiencing it. So we're looking for that safety. We're looking for that ability to speak up, that equal voice. And through that, they're going to work through many items, hopefully all of them, in the time frame. Scrum says 8 hours for a month-long sprint. That is often equated down to about 4 hours for a 2-week sprint. And you will see teams either rush through it. They'll do that first part, the what and the why, and kind of go, we're done, and move on. That's not good, because time and time again, those teams will find that when they're doing the work, they're actually in development, they're going to uncover things that they could have uncovered as part of planning. And sometimes they'll get away with it. But my experience is more often they won't. They'll uncover something that fundamentally changes what they're doing, how they're doing, or why they're doing it. So much so that it might start impinging on the work that they're actually going to do for the sprint. So for me, the ones that rush through it, that's not good. The ones that run out of time, that's not a problem. They're learning. Very often they're taking on too much work, or they're new to it, or something like that. But if we said 2 weeks of 4-hour sprint planning, if the team were genuinely out of the door in under a couple of hours, I would be questioning whether they're doing that discovery of how to solve the problems properly, if they were really digging in and thinking about options, or were they just doing what they'd done before? And maybe that's right. It's not a right or wrong. This is an opportunity to talk to people. You want to understand, is it because you've solved one of these before and you've got a way to just works? Or is it because you're just doing what John said because he's got the biggest mouth? And you really want to lean on your Scrum Masters to be not in the content of the conversation, but be in the conversation, to be aware how planning is going, to try and nudge them onto a healthier sort of course of dialogue. So, what do others think? Am I just talking to the void? Okay. That's like a training class.
Listening and learning.
No, it's good. You just never know. Are you just rambling now, John? Okay, I'll throw it back to you for another question, if you wish, or want to build on what I've just talked about.
I think just to cover similar along the same lines as Jim's question, really. A lot of the sprint ceremonies are often referred to as stand-up sessions. Again, having never done one, I've heard differing opinions as to whether they should be stand-up, whether they shouldn't be stand-up. And just talking about sprint planning, should it be, in your opinion?
In short, no. Okay. So the idea behind a stand-up, the daily scrum, is often what's referred to as a stand-up. This short 15-minute meeting to sort of plan and coordinate the upcoming day or the next 24 hours. The idea being that if you make a bunch of developers, and this so harks back to coming from the software world, if you make a bunch of coders stand up for 15 minutes, they'll go faster. A, 20 years ago, that's probably true. If I think of the average developer that I worked with 20 years ago, fitness was not a word that would be thrown around often. Today, have you seen them? It's disgustingly healthy people. They could stand up for 15 minutes without batting an eyelid. You're not denying it, though, are you?
No.
So the idea is to get these things to go quicker, okay? Which in a daily scrum, because it's highly focused, you really want them to, say as little as they need to say while achieving the outcomes that they're looking for. You can stand up. Sprint planning, that's 4 hours probably. Any of you comfortable standing for 4 hours straight? I mean, I am. I've got the whole thing set up for it.
I think part of the reason for my question was that I've worked with lots of teams in more of a waterfall methodology where it's remote teams. And so a lot of the sprint stuff that I've certainly experienced through learning is all, co-located. You're in the same room. In the real world, it often isn't that way. So how do you enforce, things to happen quickly, or for people to stand up, or whatever it takes to get things to work in a quick way when somebody might be on the other side of the planet?
Yeah. I've never required stand up for any meeting. And the main reason is one of my last roles as a developer, we got a new Scrum Master who appeared. The daily Scrum, he was like, it's a stand-up, you have to stand up. And one of the guys, point blank, refused. We were still sat at our desks in a horseshoe, and the Scrum Master was stood outside of it. It was day one, 9:15, something like that in the morning. Pretty much first interaction with him was yelling at us because we were having a chat sat down. So we all stood up, except for one of the developers who just said, no, I'm not standing up. You can't make me. So the Scrum Master marched round, clearly to have a, I'm sure, polite discussion with him, and discovered that Dave had no legs. He was sat in a wheelchair. And Dave, quite smugly, and he was, he enjoyed winding people up about this. He probably still does today. He was quite clearly, go on then, make me stand up. Physical impossibility. And since that, it's one of the things that I've always been, actually, you don't need to stand up. That none of these things need to be stood up. You need to be comfortable. Okay, sprint planning is it's real work. It's it's thinking work. I do my best thinking walking around in circles and all sorts. It drives the wife nuts. Working from home is not all good. She shouts at me more. But they need to be comfortable. They're going to be doing this for a few hours. Sitting down seems a reasonable position to take, and just say, you know what, stand up, sit down, move around, do whatever you need to do to be fully engaged throughout this. So that's probably what I would say.
Cool, thank you.
So yeah, you can sit there with your cup of coffee. You don't have to stand up.
I think the focus should be on the goal of the sprints. You know, not this. You know, don't like today. Most things are virtual. They're remote. You know, not going to expect someone to stand up at his desk at home. You know.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. It's yeah.
I've seen pictures of the daily stand up where guys are holding the plank position while they are talking. Yeah, that's no wonder they're all fit.
Right. So, next one. How would you help the team visualize their capacity for the upcoming sprint? So this is an interesting one. This is one that I've been guilty of, I will say. How many of you recognise teams that forget things like the bank holidays that are coming up?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's usually me.
Yeah, it was always me. I forgot Christmas one year. I was like, "Why are we moving? Why are we moving the review?" And they went, "John, it's Christmas Day." Oh, which one of the other developers was just looking at me for the dawning to go through, and he went, "And you've bought nothing, have you?" I was like, "No, absolutely nothing." So yeah, but actually, I keep it simple. Very often it's a calendar. I mean, nothing more than that. So the starting place is how many days are actually in this sprint? We're working on a 2-week sprint. We've got 10 days. Do you? And does everybody? So for me, number one part of capacity is, I don't care. Well, I do care how many points you delivered in the last sprint. But we're saying you'll deliver roughly the same amount with it all being equal. Well, let's start with the all being equal. Is it all equal? Do we have the same people for the same amount of time? Calendar. I mean, nothing flash than that. Put everybody's up with their holidays on. You know, Jim's got a training course for these 2 days. You know, John's out for a long weekend there. Does that matter? Yeah, of course it does. If we've got particular skills that nobody else in the team does. So, step one for me, simple calendar. You know, doesn't have to be a proper calendar, you know, in Outlook or Google or whatever. It can be a spreadsheet that you just note up. Doesn't really matter. Make it nice and simple. Good old Post-its. Okay. And then I very often use a simple histogram chart to just show them this is how fast you're moving. This is, you know, I'm not a fan of the term, but hopefully we all know not to misuse it. This is the team's velocity. You know, looking back over the last few sprints, it looks like you achieved this much. You know, in a 2-week sprint, all being equal, you'll achieve the 30 points you achieved last sprint. Looks like we've got the same amount of time from the same people. We'll achieve about 30 points. I deliberately keep it very simple. Possibly because I'm simple. I don't know, how do other people visualise this?
Very similar. In fairness, it's a simple calendar. The first thing normally I would ask anyone on holidays, day off, you know, and we, work from there. Any public holidays, and sometimes that can be difficult if your teams are in different regions, so you may not know it's a public holiday in Italy, or India, sorry, and so you ask and say, okay, based on that, no, we're down X amount of days overall. We work our velocity from that, and we go.
Yeah. So there you go. 2 of us saying keep it simple. Anyone else want to pitch in?
Sorry, we've tried to also, in our teams, ask the team members if they have any regular recurring meetings in the workplace outside of the Scrum teams, any events that are happening outside of what we're trying to collectively pick up. We've had mixed results. Some team members fully get it and are happy to share probably too much. We've got half an hour meetings here, an hour meeting there. Like, no, just the total numbers fine, or however. And you've got some who are still quite reserved in sharing that level of, well, a level of detail, never mind that level of detail. So we've tried to get into try to explain and try to coach the teams into be open about what other commitments you've got outside the Scrum team. So commitments we've now banded together with holidays, public holidays, etc., just to try and make it a little less personal. I think some of the feedback was people felt like a bit like micromanagement, when all we're saying is a total number, hours, etc. So we tried that and had a little bit. So I'm just wondering if there's any advice, thoughts that anyone has for that particular.
I was just wondering if anyone shared calendars, because I like sort of within my immediate product management team, we kind of have shared calendars, and they don't show what it is, it just shows whether someone's busy or not. So I don't know if, I suppose it depends on the size of the team, because I'm working with a very small team of myself, an associate product manager and one developer currently. So, I mean, it might be slightly different when you've kind of got a massive team and trying to work out all the developers, you'd be there for days. But yeah, I think the kind of amount of hours you're potentially available in a week might be a good way of doing it.
Yeah, I think this is one of those questions that really gets contextual. It's sort of Ben alludes to. Some teams don't want to share this. Some people don't want to share this information. You know, particularly if you're working with external parties. They're there for a period of time. How they, you know, for whatever reason, they don't really want to talk about it. Okay. The good thing is the data is going to let you know. So you're going to see these deviations as things, you know, as Jim says, public holidays and things change all over the world. We can do our best, but we're not trying to be perfect. We're not predicting the future here. All we're doing is setting a reasonable expectation of what the team can deliver. So some teams I have used shared calendars, and they've been able to pull up on a single screen. This is what it looks like for everybody for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Yeah. Others, they genuinely used an online tool, I can't remember the name of it, where they put the total hours available, you know, in a field, and it reduced capacity. I think they had 80% of whatever they said, and that was how they planned. They planned using hours. I'm not sure how good it was. I didn't stay working with them for too long, but it didn't seem to be great, but it's what they wanted to do. And I think when we look at it, that's what we have to remember with teams, is we're trying to guide them. We're not trying to answer for them. We're trying to say, look, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? You've got other meetings in the diary. Hold this different discussion about whether you really ought to have other meetings in the diary when you're part of a Scrum team. But take it into account. Okay, given that, does it look like roughly the same capacity as we've had previously? And if so, we should be in the ballpark for what we can do. Mohammed, I saw that flash on and off there. Didn't know if you had something to add.
Apologies on that.
No, it's all right. Okay. I can't remember I think I read off the screen for that one. So, what questions do you want to build on it, or totally different? No? Okay, I'm going to jump to, should teams break user stories down further into tasks? As part of planning, yeah, they can. Not beforehand. And this, for me, is one of the things you see with teams, is that's what they think refinement's for. That's actually planning. To break something down into a task, you have to have decided how you're going to solve the problem. Okay, that's part of the function of planning. And sometimes you need to break it down into tasks to understand how you're going to solve the problem. It goes backwards. So for me, yes, actually, it's a pretty good practice, particularly for newer teams who maybe haven't got their items, their user stories down small so that they're comfortable taking it in, and not all teams want to get there. It can be a very good practice to say, okay, we'll take this in. What do we need to do? This isn't talking about what the problem is now. This is, what do we actually need to do to solve this problem? What are the steps we need to take? Really good idea then is to make a list of them. Be it on Post-it, stick it into an electronic tool, whatever you want to do. Because in doing that, they're going to uncover stuff. I still remember as a developer, we broke it down and we said we need to do this and we'll talk to this service that this other team has built. And one of the people who was in our team was formerly a part of that other team, and he went, they never built that service. Well, that was useful to know as part of planning, because a fundamental part of our product relied on a service they'd never bothered to build because they didn't see the point of it. Which immediately called into question, can we take this item into the sprint? Can we actually do this work? And it turned out, yes, we could. We just had to build the thing for the other team because they wouldn't do it. And it was perfectly possible within the time we had available. So I would probably go, yes, teams can. And in fact, for teams who are newer to an agile way of working, or they are struggling with things popping up in the sprint that they've not considered, I would probably go so far as to recommend they did break things down further into tasks. And then once all the tasks are done, they will know that the work's done. It creates another level of visibility, so it's really clear, is this done or not? All the stuff's done, we're done. What do other people think?
I agree with the task spread. It's good practice of the teams. I've actually seen them do it the odd occasion of refinement when they were struggling to understand the story in more detail and start working it out, and then go, oh, okay, now we know what we need to do. We can give it an estimate here and have an idea. But that's like 1 in 100 stories kind of thing. It helped them. So I wasn't going to knock it. If they were doing it every story, I would have got ads,
Yeah. And I think that nuance becomes really important. Sorry, Jim.
Go ahead. No, continue, John.
I think that nuance becomes important. There's no definitive rules in any of this. What we're looking at is, for this circumstance, what's the best way forward? Sometimes, I've had people go, oh, we don't know if that's possible. Can we quickly whiteboard it? When I'm sat in the role as a Scrum Master, it's like 10 minutes. It's like, yeah. It's okay, I'll put a time box on for 10 minutes. At the end of 10 minutes, you need to give me an answer, yes or no. And if the answer is we don't know, we need to take it out of this conversation and deal with it separately. You need to do some work, and the product owner has to decide whether or not that work is important enough to be in the sprint. I think this is the thing many organisations rather than individuals struggle with, is there is no hard and fast rule in how we approach these things. Breaking tasks down is good, but not always. Some teams don't do it. Planning in refinement is not a good idea unless it's going to help you. Thank you, Jim. Sorry, I did cut in as well, didn't I?
No, you're okay. I forgot what I was going to finish. You're okay.
Yeah. Okay. What other questions do people have about sprint planning, preferably?
How would you go about starting if you don't do it already? Because as I said before, I've got kind of a small team, and I think it's kind of coming to the point, getting a new developer on soon. We're just recruiting as we speak, so it's going to start becoming a need. How would you slowly introduce it to a team that beforehand were kind of having weekly stand-ups and not much else?
Yeah, so as teams grow, planning becomes an important thing for the alignment of what are we working on together. So the way that I would introduce it is when that one developer and planning, that's an informal chat. I really wouldn't recommend sort of having a formal thing in the diary where this is where we plan. I'm running out of work, Louise. Should we have a chat about what's next? It's a more effective approach, in my opinion. But when you've got a few developers, all I say is, well, let's put something in the diary on a regular basis so that we know, what's the most important things to work on. It doesn't have to be this big meeting. So if you're working in 2-week sprints, I'm sorry, Louise, I can't remember how long We have had that.
It's basically as long as it takes to get stuff done at the moment, just because it's very chaotic.
Yeah, I understand that one. But say you were going to choose 2-week sprints, and you say, let's put something in the diary every couple of weeks, just to have a chat about what we're going to be doing in the next 2 weeks. And when you break Scrum down and you remove the language, it's a very sensible approach, and it kicks off with, let's have a look at what's the important thing to focus on for the next 2 weeks. That's all planning's about. What are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? And how are we going to solve the problem? And if you need to, strip the Scrum language away. Just present it as that. We're going to focus on what's the most important thing to get done for the next few weeks. Okay, and folks, work out how you intend to solve it. And if you need to ask me questions, here I am. And then apply reflection practice, retrospectives, continuous improvement ideas. Right? Just at the end of it, because it's brand new, take some time, and I recommend this to many of the teams I work with, at the end of any of their meetings, only has to be 5 minutes, but take some time to collectively reflect on the meeting and just say, okay, we did a thing. Did we get what we needed to out of this? Number one, was it worthwhile? But how can we improve? What could we do differently next time to get to the end of this meeting, or get that outcome quicker or better, or take more through that process, whatever it is? But just a few minutes, so you've got a couple of new devs, it just becomes normal practice that they look for ways to improve it. And in that, actually, something more like sprint planning, as I've been talking about, comes out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it sounds like what my weekly stand-ups are pretty much like at the moment. It's like, what do we need to go? What's important to get done? How's it going to happen? And then I've kind of just started to I've called it a refinement, because it's just more to talk about stuff that's more in the future. Like, we've got this idea, we've done this research. What could that look like as a solution? So that's happening every couple of weeks, starting soon. So yeah, kind of slowly building up on that. But yeah, the kind of interesting thing of adding sort of like a reflection point at the end of the meeting might be quite interesting. Although my developer's so laid back, he's horizontal, so I'm not quite sure how I can get anything out of him.
If nothing else, you're going to just be prodding that grey matter and putting it in the back of his mind. Not everything is for immediate benefit. Sometimes just building that habit, and when the new person comes on board, it's already there. It's just what we do.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
What other questions do you have around sprint planning? Okay. Well, I guess we'll call that the end of it then. Thank you very much for coming along. I'm happy to hang around if you do want to have a chat, or you've got feedback for me. As I said at the start, not sure how this was going to run. I hope it's been useful. I hope you've got the questions answered that you wanted. I haven't seen the chat go off with any others. I don't think there's anything there other than the one that I put on to prompt people to start adding. But thank you very much for coming along. This has been recorded. I've got 2 recordings going, so hopefully there's something useful that will come out of it. It will get whatever it is the whizzes that do that with it do to it. And I'll get it shared out to everybody as soon as we can get it turned around. Again,
thank you for your time, John.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.